Have you ever walked through Sydney's Central Station and seen this chip out of this marble stonework? Probably not. Who would notice that sort of thing? But it turns out it's the only reminder of what was once described as the most disgraceful episode in Australia's military history. Today I'm in Sydney at Central Station, the largest and busiest train station in Australia. It opened in 1906 and 10 years later it was the site of what's become known as the Battle of Central Station, the climax of the Liverpool Riots of 1916. It began at a military camp in the suburb of Casula, about 30 kilometres southwest of Central. The purpose of the camp was to train recruits to fight in the First World War, but so many young men signed up that it soon became overcrowded. At one point, there were about 17,000 soldiers living in the camp, which was pretty much just a load of tents. The conditions were poor. Recruits found it difficult to get leave, they felt overworked and excessively disciplined. This was of course in stark contrast to the relaxed and luxurious conditions on the Western Front, where they were due to be sent. Like true Australians, some recruits complained that they couldn't get alcohol at the camp, and some even believed the conditions were more favourable at the nearby Holsworthy internment camp for prisoners of war, mainly from Germany. Although that's described as one of the harshest internment camps in Australia, resembling a prison with basic sanitary facilities and corrupt guards who would shoot at prisoners for fun. But because of the poor conditions at the military camp in Casula, there were a couple of small riots, and tensions kept building from there. On the 14th of February 1916, a new syllabus was introduced for the military, meaning instead of training for 35 hours a week, recruits would train for 40 and a half. Imagine that, a 40-hour work week. So that's when it all kicked off. A number of recruits went on strike, making their way to nearby Liverpool where the main camp was. They were then joined by more troops, and together they marched into the centre of town. Crowds of soldiers entered local pubs and drank them dry before ransacking and vandalising other businesses. It turned into a full-scale riot, with the police powerless to stop them. Thousands of drunk soldiers then commandeered trains and made their way to Sydney. When they got here, they marched through the city, chanting. They raided pubs, ransacked stalls, and targeted shops owned by foreigners, in particular Italians, Greeks, and Germans. Apparently, nobody told them that Italy was one of their allies in the war, and Greece went on to join them too. Some recruits were arrested, and their comrades invaded police stations in an attempt to free them. There was chaos on the streets of Sydney, and it only got worse as the evening went on and the troops got more and more drunk. It was like the aftermath of an Aston Villa match. More police officers and soldiers were drafted in to put an end to the riot, and eventually the recruits ended up here at Central Station. Either they made their way back here by themselves, ready to head home, or they were herded here, but most of them were pretty drunk at this point. At the station, though, the violence continued. The rioting recruits threw objects and even fired a water hose at the police and military picket. In the chaos, a gun was fired in the air, and so the police and military returned fire, killing Private Ernest William Keefe, a member of the 6th Light Horse Regiment who was among the rioters. He suffered a bullet wound to the cheek. Several others were injured, and one of the bullets grazed the marble wall, leaving this indentation. The shooting rather sobered up the soldiers, and they decided it was probably best to just give up and go home. A number of them were arrested and sentenced to hard labour, but the majority of them were let off because soldiers were desperately needed for the war effort. Shortly after the riot, the number of recruits at the Liverpool training camp was reduced, and the Kashula camp shut down, with its trainees being relocated. The riot also may have swayed votes ahead of a referendum just months later on the time that pubs, clubs and hotels in New South Wales had to close. A majority of voters backed a 6 p.m. close time for anywhere that sold alcohol. In the same year, the rule was also enforced in Victoria and Tasmania. In New South Wales, it was eventually changed to 10 p.m. in 1955. Across Australia, liquor laws have changed over the years, but Australians are still known for their love of alcohol. This bullet hole is a reminder of what happens when that love goes a bit too far.